really quick, Alexia, what is this broadcast right here?
I don't know.
It's next to the Q&A.
Mine also says you're in a practice session. Should I click start webinar or not yet?
Just a second.
Mhm.
Just ignore it.
Okay.
And you can go ahead and start webinar now. So you see that?
Yeah,
Go ahead and do that and start at exactly 4 o'clock.
started at 4. Got it. Okay. And Dr. Anhal, I just wanted to confirm with you, how do you pronounce the name of your organization?
COA.
COA?
Yes.
Got it. Perfect. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Sorry. My name is Nisha Kalmadi, and it is my absolute pleasure to have Dr. Ann Holt with us today. So a little bit about her. She is a psychologist, emotional fitness consultant, and the co-founder and chief clinical officer of COA, which is an organization dedicated to finding new strategies to treat issues in mental health. She studied psychology at the University of Michigan and attained her master's and doctorate degrees in clinical psychology in Berkeley, California. For the last 13 years, Dr. Ann Holt has been working clinically with executives, founders, and tech employees, and she's been conducting extensive research with prominent psychologists and entrepreneurs about how leaders can improve their emotional fitness. She has matched over 700 people into therapy and has collaborated with some of the fastest growing technology companies in the world, including Google, TEDx, and GitHub. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ann Holt.
Hi, all. So great to be here.
So for today's session, we're mainly going to be doing a Q&A. This is going to allow you guys to kind of ask her about what she does, if you have any questions about psychology, and just to understand the profession as much as you guys would like. Okay, so I'm going to head and open this up. So I have a couple of questions for Dr. Ann Holt. While I'm asking these questions, you guys are free to use the Q&A section to ask questions, and we will get to those after the first 5. So my first question for Dr. Ann Holt is, what inspired you to form your organization?
Absolutely. So, a little bit about me and about COA. So, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm the co founder and chief clinical officer of COA. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I've always had an interest in the psychology of the entrepreneur, and I specifically wanted to understand a more proactive approach to working on our mental health. I wanted to help people think about working on their mental health more like going to the gym and less like going to the doctor, because in our culture, mental health is very reactive. People often wait until things are totally falling apart before they seek support. But that's a little to me like waiting until you have early signs of heart disease to start doing cardio. Ideally, when it comes to mental health, you are doing the work beforehand in an ongoing way so that you're strengthening your resilience muscles so that you actually prevent some of the mental health struggles that you might have faced. So a few years ago, I met up with my now co-founder, Alexa, and we wanted to figure out, what does a gym for mental health look like? Why is it that there's Equinox and 24-Hour Fitness and Barry's Boot Camp and One Medical and all of these organizations that are dedicated to physical fitness, but there aren't the same for mental and emotional fitness? So we wanted to make that happen. So a number of years ago, I did a big research study. It's called interpretive phenomenological analysis, which is a fancy way of saying that I interviewed 100 psychologists and 100 entrepreneurs. And I asked them, how would you know if you were sitting across the table from an emotionally healthy person? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And out of this research came what I call the 7 traits of emotional fitness. These are the 7 things that emotionally healthy people are working on all the time. And those 7 things are self-awareness, empathy, mindfulness, curiosity, playfulness, resilience, and communication. So my co-founder and I decided to figure out, how can we help people train in these 7 traits? How do you do an emotional push-up? What does that actually look like? And so we created out all of this content that helps people become a little more resilient, become a little better of communicators. And now at COA, all of our classes are taught by licensed therapists, and you're essentially figuring out, how can I be proactive in these 7 areas of my life so that overall I have better mental and emotional health. The other thing for me is, I'm sure you all have seen that mental health is having kind of a moment right now, and there are all kinds of companies popping up to help with it. And I think that's great. I have an abundance mentality about it. The more people helping with it, the better. The problem, though, is when you combine tech and any kind of medical or health situation, what can happen is sometimes there's a temptation to grow really quickly and efficiently, and it can sometimes happen at the expense of what actually makes the product work. So it's really important to me that we maintained clinical integrity when we created this company. I wanted to make sure that what we're offering is actually helpful and works, and that it's ethical ethical, because when it comes to therapy and psychology, ethics are a really, really important part of the work. So I was really dedicated to making sure that we found a way to create this company that could help a lot of people in this proactive way, but that we didn't sell our soul in order to do it, essentially. So that has been my mission. And for those of you who are interested in COA, the website is joincoa.com. Go ahead and check it out. I'll tell you this again at the end, but I actually created a coupon code so that you could try it cheaper if you want. If you put emotionally fit in, you'll get 50% off your first month of membership. And it's like a membership to a gym. You take classes, there's on-demand content, you have community, and the classes are live and experiential, so you're actually in there practicing these things. And it's been really cool to see that when you frame it more as fitness, I think it gives more people permission to work on it. People who might not think that they need therapy but want to be working on themselves, that's what we've created a space for.
Sounds good. Thank you. Another question that we have is, what experience did you have in college that was really impactful for you and helped you decide what you wanted to do with your career?
Good question. So both of my parents are physicians, so I always thought that I was going to be a physician. And so I went into college pre-med, and I was taking all of the pre-med classes and hating them and not doing well in them. And I went to my advisor and I said, how am I going to get into medical school? I don't think I'm doing super well in organic chemistry, and I don't really like biology and physics. I'm not really feeling it. And my advisor was like, why are you pre-med? If you don't like these subjects, why are you pre-med? And essentially my answer was like, because I want my parents to be proud of me. And my advisor's like, that's not a good enough reason. You need to do what you actually want to do in the world, and you'll be better at it because you'll actually want to do it. And so I had to really evaluate what it was that I was most enjoying, and what I was most enjoying was psychology and philosophy. I realized that rather than spending my life trying to answer answerable questions, which is what I think a lot of the sciences do, I really wanted to spend my life trying to answer unanswerable questions, which I think in a way is kind of what psychology and philosophy do. There are no perfect answers. It's just that the product of thinking about them changes them and is generative and powerful. And so I dropped pre-med and I went full into psychology and philosophy as the two primary areas of focus. And one of the most profound experiences I had was this professor. His name is Richard Mann. I went to the University of Michigan, and he was famous, sort of like known for having been part of the original Harvard LSD studies. When he went to Harvard, he was actually one of the people that they tested LSD on and studied. And he was just this very spiritual, conscientious, interesting psychologist. And all of his classes, they were not about grades. I mean, he gave out grades because he had to, but he didn't actually care what you got. He didn't care if you did well. He didn't care if you did the reading. He really didn't care if you didn't show up. His philosophy was like, that's on you. You're paying thousands and thousands of dollars for this education. I will provide it, and you can either take it or leave it. And so the format of his classes is that he would pick these books that were really profound and life-changing, and we would read them, and then we would just sit around and discuss them. And that was it. If you showed up and you discussed them, you got an A. And it was really just about learning how to think, learning how to talk about interesting things with other people, taking constraints off of yourself and thinking about what's possible when you don't feel like you have to find answers, and instead you can just wonder and explore and get curious. And I got so much out of these classes, and it taught me so much about what it means in therapy to sit in a room with someone and just wonder with them, just be curious with them, and not have to find answers, and instead just to keep people company in the confusion of life. So that was really powerful. Another thing I got from that whole experience is the idea that when you know a lot about psychology, you know a little about everything, because the world is spoken in the language of relationships, and psychology is the study of relationships. So if you can understand how it is that we relate to ourselves and to other people, you're going to kind of unlock the key to a lot of how the world works. And I've really found that no matter what I'm doing in the world, my experience with psychology helps me with that and has helped me understand it in a new level. I sometimes feel like I can never see the world the same. Now that I see it through this lens, I can never go back, and that's both a blessing and a curse. But it's a very powerful thing to find something that you actually love and to invest in it. And I think that's the advice I'd give out of this, is really evaluate, why have you chosen the path that you've chosen? And is that the path that you really want to take? And if not, what does it look like to give yourself some space to discover what that path is?
So if there was an experience that you would tell any college student who's been thinking about since they were 4 years old, this is the path I'm going to do. I definitely want to do medicine or become a PA or become a nurse. If you could give these students any advice, like before you decide on this, try this experience or take this class, what would you recommend?
So, I would firstly recommend that you take some classes on things that have nothing to do with your major. Take classes just because they sound interesting. Take classes just because you've heard good things about the professor. Take classes that you just think will bring you joy or light you up or grow you in some way. Like some of the most interesting classes I took in college weren't psychology or philosophy or pre-med classes. And those are really powerful because I think college is more about learning how to learn and learning how to think than it is about the actual knowledge that you're getting. I didn't, anything that I do in my day to day career is not coming from what I learned in college. It's coming from what I learned in grad school and the actual practice that I did and my own therapy and all of that. And so I'm so glad that in school I spent a little time just learning how to learn. And what comes of that too is maybe unexpected things that you love that you didn't know that you would love. So taking some classes that have nothing to do with your main path, I think is great. Another thing is reach out to professors that you are drawn to and cultivate a relationship with them. I'm not sure what all of your educational experiences are like, but at Michigan, the classes were really, really big, and you didn't have a super personal relationship with your professor. You had to really go out of your way to make that happen. And I had been given this advice. And so I went to the professors who I felt particularly connected with, and I asked them if I could come to office hours or meet with them once a month for coffee and learn about their path and to discuss the things that we had done in class. And I cultivated these really beautiful, powerful relationships with people, and they became my mentors, and they became the people that I felt like I could go to as I was figuring out what do I want to do with my life and what are my options. And it made this really big school feel more small and more personal. So I thought that was very powerful. And then I know this is not financially doable for every person, so I'm aware that this isn't an option across the board, but if it's an option to you, study abroad. Get out of your normal area and go see what it's like to do something elsewhere. It doesn't even have to be a different country. There are a lot of programs now where you can just go to a different school for a semester or a different school for a rotation, whatever it might be. Take those opportunities because you're going to learn so much just from being in a different environment. You're going to meet different kinds of people. You're going to discover different parts of yourself, especially for those of you who are going to school in a similar place that you grew up in. It's really growing and powerful to get experience elsewhere. So all through your life, I recommend if you have opportunities to dip into a different culture, a different place, whatever it might be, it's really powerful. So I'd say those are my 3 suggestions.
All right, that's really great advice. Thank you. Another question that I had was, what is an issue with mental health specific to students that you wish more people were aware of?
There's so many here. One of the things that I would say specifically to students is that it's a really confusing time of life. When we leave home, or even if we're still living at home, but we are away from home to do these studies, we're individuating. And the word individuating describes the process of separating yourself from the people who you have depended on for most of your life. And it's a really complicated time of life. We simultaneously totally feel like adults, but also don't really feel like we know what we're doing. And we are establishing ourselves and making choices for ourselves in a new way. And it's exciting and wonderful and also scary. And I think it's so important to invest in your own mental health during this time so that you feel like you can navigate this kind of choppy waters and not have to do it alone. So I think it's a really, really good time to get into therapy and to find therapeutic spaces for yourself. The other thing I remember from this time is it starts to feel like all of your decisions are really consequential. It starts to feel like every choice you make sets you down this path that you can never get off of. And so it's very heavy and tough. And I wish that I had been able to know that, yes, they are consequential in the sense that you are starting to figure out what your life path is, but that you can always make different choices. You can change careers, you can change schools, you can do new things unexpectedly later. And so you can take a little pressure off yourself, I think, to feel like you have to have it all figured out now. You can try and fail and make mistakes and try again. I wish I'd been able to embody that better. And then the other thing is the learning process goes on forever. I remember thinking that people who, like adults, when I was in college and grad school, I remember thinking people ahead of me had it figured out. They'd arrived, they'd gotten to where they are, and now they understood what they needed to do, and that things just made sense. And that's not the case. I realized when I got there myself that everyone's kind of making it up as they go forever. Even really established adults, we're all kind of just figuring it out in any given moment, and the learning process of life never ends. And so I wish I had not been as afraid to try different things and to fail and to change my mind and to backpedal and go a different path, that kind of thing. So those are really important. For those of you who are interested in the idea of therapy, I really recommend you consider it. There are all these misconceptions about therapy, that it's only for people who are broken, or that it is only if you're in a crisis should you do it, that kind of thing. And the truth is, therapy is for anyone who wants to better understand who they are in the world and how they can have a healthier relationship with themselves and the people around them. So therapy is expensive, it takes time, but there are things that are available to you that you might not know about. If you type in sliding scale therapy clinic plus your city, you will likely find places where therapists are being trained, and so the therapy is much more affordable. So I think that's a great way to go. Your insurance might cover some of therapy. It can be hard to find a good in-network person. But if it's available to you, I highly recommend starting this work before you need it. Because when you go to therapy when you're in crisis, then most of the work is about managing the crisis. But when you go to therapy when things are mostly okay, that's when you do the really deep, juicy work, the stuff that you didn't even know you needed to work on. There is so much you don't know about yourself. And in therapy, you get to discover what those things are and make conscious decisions about them so that they're not kind of ruling your life from underneath the surface.
All right, that's really great. We're going to go ahead and take some questions from the Q&A.
Great.
So someone asked, what did your education path look like?
Yeah, so I spoke to that a little bit. I had a lot of privilege growing up in that I grew up in an area where the education system was strong, and I had a pretty good early education. Like I said, my parents are physicians, and a really strong emphasis was put on education, sometimes to the point that I felt a little like I didn't have any choice but to dedicate my whole life to being very educated. I sometimes wonder what my life would have looked like if it had been more okay to sort of follow my whims. But I kind of knew from a young age that I would definitely be going to college, and I knew pretty soon in college that I would definitely be going to grad school. So I grew up in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, went to school in Michigan, and then right after college I went to grad school. And this is one of the things that I would tell my younger self to think about doing differently. I didn't take any time to be young and free, to travel, to be, to make mistakes and to do things just because I wanted to. I went right to school. So I did spend 3 months in Spain, living in Spain after college. And then I started grad school right away at a place called the Wright Institute, which is on Berkeley's campus. And it is a very clinically oriented psych grad school program. So rather than being as much about research and academia, it was more like your very first month, you start seeing patients, even though you have no idea what you're doing. And so I got thrown into that. I really loved it, but I knew I'd want to do something non-traditional. I'm a person who's never wanted to do only one thing at a time. I always like to have my hand in many things. So when I started grad school, I pretty quickly also started putting together talks that I could do at companies. Because my friends and family were in tech, and they would come home from their jobs and they would tell me about the problems they were having at their jobs. And I would think, I'm learning about this in grad school. Why aren't people talking more about psychology of business? Like, this was before this mental health thing was really taking shape in the world of tech. So I started putting together talks on things like imposter syndrome and anxiety and leadership. And I was doing that research I told you about these 7 traits. And so while I was in grad school, I was also doing talks at companies. And for people who are interested in this path, what I recommend is, and this could be in any field, if you are in physical health, whatever your specialty is, people need that information. And so if you can put together a compelling talk about something that you think is relevant to a community, what you can do is you can offer to do that talk for free in exchange for being able to put that logo on your website. I went to like Twitter and Google and I said, hey, can I do this talk for your employees just for free? I'm training to be a therapist. I think it could be really useful. And they're like, yeah, sure, why not? And so I would go and do these talks and I would get better at them. I'd practice, I'd learn, I'd put the logos on my website. And over time, I started to feel really confident in what I was offering. And I started to feel like I could charge for what I was doing. So I was simultaneously in grad school and also doing these public speaking kind of thing. I did a TEDx talk for people who are interested in public speaking. TEDx is a great way to start that. And because I was doing so many things, I took kind of the longer path for grad school. So, all in all, my grad school took me 9 years, start to finish. It was 4 years of classes. I took a year off to, you know, rest, and I lived in Argentina for a little bit because I had never done that after school. And then I went back. I did another longer than usual internship because I wanted to deep dive into a certain type of psychology. And then I did a private practice pre-doc and post-doc. So I had to get my hours. You need 3,000 hours on either side. And so I finally graduated in 2016. And then I had to study for licensure. That took a year. And I'm sure, as all of you know, all of the tests you have to take along the way to any of these paths are intense. And so then I was really fully in it around like 2017, 2018, 2019. And then it was 2019 that I started the company with my co-founder. And we raised venture capital money in 2019. We raised $3 million. And we were supposed to start brick and mortar spaces. We were all set to open actual gyms for mental health. And that was when COVID hit, obviously. And so we did a quick pivot and we switched to having it be all online, all remote classes, which was hard. And I should have done a better job kind of grieving that things didn't look the way I thought they were going to. And that's where we still are now. It's all remote, but we will probably be brick and mortar in person at some point once that's safe to do.
Okay. Can you give more of an overview of what COA does?
Absolutely. So COA is a gym for mental health, and our goal is to make working on your mental health as proactive, as accessible, and as community-based as working on your physical fitness is. And we do this through therapist-led emotional fitness classes. And the classes are live. You're in a Zoom room like this one. The therapist instructor will teach a concept, and then you'll go into a breakout room, you'll practice that concept. And the classes are not therapy. You're not asked to like unearth your deepest childhood traumas or anything, but they are therapeutic, and it is a therapist teaching it. And so you are getting vulnerable, you are kind of exploring parts of yourself. And what we try to do in every class is combine a perspective shifting insight with an action-oriented framework, meaning I want to help you think about something differently, but then I also want to help you know, okay, now that I'm thinking about it differently, what do I actually do differently? What do about it? So you leave with real ideas of how you can take this into your life. I'll add that link again. We also do therapy matchmaking. That's on pause right now, so I don't want to go into that too much, but we help people find great therapists. We'll be building that out a little bit down the line. And we work with a lot of companies. So we have worked with NBC Universal and Amex and Spotify and all kinds of cool, or the NBA, we worked with them to help them help their employees with their mental health in an ongoing and proactive way. So I would say the classes are better experienced than explained. If this is interesting to you, just come try a class. There are classes you can try for free without having to sign up for the full membership, or just dive right into the membership with the code and see what it's all about. The feedback we get is very positive. We have really good feedback about the classes, and I've seen that it can just be really powerful to be in a room with other people who have a shared experience and who get it and who want to work on themselves too. For any of you who do care about working on yourself, I'm sure you've been around people who don't seem to be doing that work and how frustrating that is. So it's just so nice and therapeutic to be in a group of people who are like, yeah, I'm going to work on myself. Something I say a lot is our culture tends to have this attitude in relationships where it's like, I'll take care of you if you take care of me. But at COA, our philosophy is instead, what if we thought, I'll take care of me for you if you'll take care of you for me? Like, what if every person took responsibility for who they are in the world and worked on it so that we can show up in healthier ways for each other and so that we can move forward together? So that's what we're doing at COA, is gathering communities of those people. I hope that I'll see you all there. It's a special space for sure.
All right. So somebody asked, what does a day in your job look like?
Ooh, what a question. I love it. Part of why I love being a founder is every day looks completely different. And even as a founder, I'm doing many different things. So I have a small private practice. So on any given day, I might be seeing a couple patients. And then I do a lot of public speaking. So in any given week or month, I'm probably going to do a talk like this one or a talk in person somewhere at a conference or for a company. I'm also working on writing a book, and we have a podcast. So on Tuesdays, I record the podcast. So I'd be going to the podcast studio and meeting up with the guest and doing that. I can share the link to that podcast, which I really love and would love y'all to check out. Here is the sort of like homepage for the podcast. And then in terms of the actual COA work, what my day-to-day looks like is a crap ton of meetings. Like I could not have more meetings. I'm in 6 to 8 hours of meetings every single day. And those meetings are with all the different people at the company, with investors, with my co-founder. My co-founder and I do co-founder therapy to make sure our relationship stays healthy. So I might be doing that. I'm in my own therapy twice a week. So I am in my own therapy on some of those days. But every day looks different. And I just have a very insane looking calendar to keep track of what I need to be doing at any given moment.
Sounds good. Our next attendee asked, how did you transition to the various types of ways in which you function as a clinical psychologist?
That's a cool question. I think by finding people who I admire and asking them a lot of questions about what they choose and what they wish they had done differently. So, one example of that is my partner's sister is a psychologist, and she was many years ahead of me, and I would check in with her a lot about like, where are you in your schooling and what do you like about it and what do you wish you'd done differently. And I got to kind of learn from her mistakes. So for example, the school I thought I wanted to go to was the school she went to, and she said, you know what, actually I wouldn't recommend you come here, and here's why, here's where I wish I had gone. And I ended up going to this other school because I agreed with her and really liked it. And then I also, doing my own therapy helped me figure out what kind of therapist I wanted to be. So I entered grad school thinking I wanted to be one kind of therapist, but then I loved the therapy I had, and it was so impactful, and I had professors who really blew my mind, and so I switched and went that direction. In terms of deciding to do all these many random things, I have pretty significant ADHD, and one of the ways that I've dealt with my ADHD throughout my life has been not expecting myself to only do one thing or to focus on only one thing for too long, because I need novelty to keep myself interested. And so I really tried to make sure that my life looked varied and that there's lots of different things that I'm working on. And that's not for everyone. There are plenty of people who like to have one focus, and that's great. But for me, I knew I needed to do many things. So it was a lot of trying out different things, asking questions of people, and then just trying to be compassionate and forgiving of myself if I didn't like something anymore, if I wanted to make a change. And I'd explore in therapy, am I wanting to make this change just because I'm antsy, or am I wanting to make this change because it's really right for me? And having a space to do that exploring was really helpful to make sure I wasn't being impulsive or wasn't giving up too easily, that kind of thing.
All right. We have someone who asked, basically it looks like they're in the US now, they want to go to the UK to get a doctorate in clinical psychology. It's very competitive there, and the admission committees kind of look that you have an understanding of the job, I guess an understanding of what a clinical psychologist is, and the speaker says it's typically achieved by becoming an assistant psychologist. They're not sure what the equivalent job would be in the United States. So as a senior undergraduate student, what can they do to gain similar experience working with a clinical psychologist?
That's so cool. I didn't even know about being an assistant psychologist. I don't think there is a direct equivalent. There's something when you've already gone through grad school called being a psych assistant, but being a psychological assistant is someone who has already gotten into grad school and they are working as a therapist under the license of a supervisor, and you can't do that as a college student. So there isn't a great way of shadowing an actual private practice psychologist, unfortunately. I feel like we probably should have something like that. What I would recommend, honestly, if private practice is interesting to you, is to get into your own therapy. That's going to give you an idea of what therapy actually feels like. And then I would also reach out to therapists who you know or who are thought leaders in the space and ask, them lots of questions about what does your job look like, what does it feel like, what do you like about it, what do you not like about it, what is a day in your life like, what are your specialties, how did you pick those specialties. Like, just ask every question you can, and a lot of therapists will be happy to spend some time answering those questions for you. But I actually don't think that there is something that you can do that is quite the same, where you're like shadowing. That's really interesting. I'd also join associations. I'm not sure where in the US you are, but the association I'm part of is called like the APA is a good one, the American Psychology Association. Just like start to get in with your peers, and then hopefully you'll at least have people in your network that you can turn to and learn as much as possible from. Oh, actually, I have one more suggestion, which is work like a administrative position at a clinic. So one of the things several of my colleagues did in grad school to help pay for grad school is they would go to like a therapy clinic, and they would just work the front desk. And so their job was very administrative, but they got a lot of exposure to the therapists who work there and how running a clinic actually works. And, they learned about confidentiality, and they learned about the administrative side of things. So that might be one thing that you could do to kind of immerse yourself.
Our next question is, clinical psychology doctor programs are known to be more difficult to get into than med school. Do you have any additional tips for being a great applicant for clinical psychology programs? And any tips on what to do or take advantage of when one is in a clinical psych doctoral program?
Yeah, so there's lots of types of clinical psychology grad programs, remember. So there's psychiatry, which is med school. There is actual doctorate programs. And then there's also master's level programs. So doctorate programs are not your only choice. There are a lot of master's programs that are going to set you up to do all kinds of amazing psychology jobs. If the doctorate program specifically is important to you, there's also two types of programs within that. There is the PhD, which is the one that I think you're talking about, that's harder than med school, and that's because there's such a limited number of spots open. Because any given university only has like anywhere from like 3 to 12 spots. And they are paying you to teach classes in exchange for, getting your degree. And so they're really hard to get because of that. But there's a separate kind of program, which is the kind I did, called a PsyD, P-S-Y-D. So instead of the Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology, it's a Doctor of Psychology. And this is the program that focuses more on clinical work instead of academia. The downside of this kind of program is you pay to go to that school. They don't pay you. So you're likely going to have to take out student loans to get through the program. I graduated with like $250,000 of debt because of this. So that's the downside, is the financial aspect of it. But they are easier to get into because the programs accept like 60 people a year, and there's many of those programs. So that's definitely a type of program I would look into if that's interesting to you. And then in terms of what to do to take advantage of it once you're in there, I would say, firstly, try lots of different types of psychology, because there are many schools of thought, and it can be easy to sort of be lumped into one or the other quickly, and different ones are going to resonate with different people. So look into CBT, psychodynamic, existential, humanistic, look into the different types and see what's interesting you, and try different things. And then, honestly, the number one piece of advice, I know I'm a broken record here, but the number one piece of advice I have for someone who wants to make the most of grad school as a psychologist is to be in therapy yourself. I learned more from my personal therapy than I did from any class that I took. You really understand what it's about because you're doing it. You get to feel it. And I still sometimes find myself thinking, what would my therapist say right now? How would my therapist respond right now? You learn a lot from that. So I think that's one of the most important things you can do.
All right. Someone asked, how do you decide between research and clinical, and what positions are more research oriented but have an established clinical component?
Yeah. All right. So how do you decide? Obviously, that's a personal decision. I knew that I really wanted to be with people. I wanted to be in a room with people, really getting my hands dirty in that particular way. So I knew clinical was for me. But I also knew that I wanted to feel like the program that I did was really established and accredited. And so what's interesting about the PsyD program, a doctoral program, is it is very clinical, you're going to start seeing patients very early in the process, but you still have to do a doctoral dissertation. So you do still have to do some research. Every program is going to emphasize different things. So there's a program that's associated with Stanford called PGSP, I think, that is more, it's a PsyD, but it's more research heavy. So that's going to be good for a person who wants to do clinical work, but also really wants some good research experience. Then there's stuff in the middle, like the program I went to, where it's very clinical heavy, but you still do a doctoral dissertation. And then there's programs that are much more clinical, like a master's program, like an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapy degree, where you don't have to do a doctoral dissertation. So you are going to be focusing more on the clinical work. So just think about, like, what do I want to do afterwards? Do I want to be in private practice? If that's the case, I recommend leaning more clinical. Or do I want to be more in academia and doing actual research? If that's the case, then getting research experience quickly is going to be helpful.
Okay. Our next question is it possible to be part of policy making within the field of clinical psychology without being a clinical psychologist? For example, as a researcher?
I love this. You know, this isn't my expertise because I have not done a lot of work in the policy sector and not a ton in the research section of things. But yes, I do believe that you can make change in that arena without being a psychologist. And I love this question because, to be honest, when I think about what field of psychology really needs more than anything, it's policy change. Like, we are really in a tough place when it comes to policy because insurance doesn't pay well for therapy. It's not paid for in any other way. It's really hard to get therapy. It's not valued in a lot of institutions. There's a ton of stigma. The most vulnerable and oppressed members of society are the ones who are most negatively affected by all of this. We desperately need policy change. And so if this is something that's interesting to you, I thank you, and I highly encourage you to lean into it because the world needs it very badly. It's going to be hard work, but it's needed. I think almost definitely there are going to be positions for that do not require you to have a license. I think the person who understands policy is going to be the person who can make the most change there, versus a person who understands the work but doesn't understand how the law works and all of the players involved, that kind of thing. So I would recommend, if this is interesting to you, see who is working in this space and reach out to them and ask if you can have them as a mentor, if you can shadow them, if you can take them to coffee and learn about what they do and how they do it, and ask them the question, what does the world need the most here and how do I get there? Like, how do I reverse engineer from the work I want to do to where I am now? What would I need to do between here and there to be able to make that change?
Okay. Our next question is, how did you get started with starting the small business and entrepreneurship part of your life after your education? This is a attendee who's interested in neuroscience and wants to have their own private practice or small business. And what are the steps or resources you'd recommend for this?
You know, I love this because grad school does not do a good job of preparing people for the business side of things. I think it's a big loss. I think it's a problem. I think there should be a whole semester or a whole year or something in grad school where you are learning to be an entrepreneur, because if you are in private practice of any kind, whether you're a physical health clinician or a mental health clinician, you have to understand how to run a business, and it's not taught to you at all. I remember getting out of grad school and being like, okay, like, how do I do my taxes, and how do I establish myself as an actual business, and how much should I be charging? And none of this stuff was taught to us. And so I think it's really important that you seek that information early and often. And the best way to do that is to reach out to people who are already doing what you want to do and ask them a lot of questions about how they got there, what they wish they had known, what they wish they had done earlier than they did it, that kind of thing. For me, I just sort of made it up as I went, and just like interviewed a lot of people and just kind of tried to figure it out. Found a tax accountant who specialized in working with new psychologists, and they taught me a lot about how to deal with that aspect of things. And yeah, I mean, it's frustrating that it's not more clear, but a lot has been written online about it, that kind of thing. And I would just say, find other neuroscientists who have their own practice and run their own businesses, take them to coffee and learn everything you can about how they do their work.
All right. I'm going to take a few questions that I'm seeing in the chat that are private messaging. So again, guys, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. If you don't want people to know what your questions are, you have the option to make the questions anonymous. But I'll go ahead and get a few of these. So, what are some of the greatest changes you've seen in the mental health promotion field in the past 5 years, and what do you think it'll look like in the next 5 years?
You know, it's been a really interesting time for mental health because there's this mental health revolution happening where it's become undeniable that mental health is really important for overall satisfaction and well being. You know, you're seeing all over the place that companies are offering more mental health benefits, that therapy is becoming more common, the stigma of it is dropping, the younger generation is talking about it more openly, all of these wonderful things. I'd say the best thing that's happened is that the stigma has come down a little bit and that it's becoming more a part of the cultural zeitgeist. People are talking about it more openly. I think that's been the most profound thing. The downside, though, of anything becoming more popular is that it can start to get kind of bastardized and co-opted for the sake of making money. Like I'm all for capitalism, but it can get out of hand when people are more concerned with making money than taking care of patients. And so what I worry about in this next phase of things is all of these tech companies popping up and saying, "Oh, you don't really need a therapist. We have this AI chatbot. It's like the same. It's just as good." Or I'm seeing things like, startups that are cutting corners and paying therapists really poorly and trying to make profits be the number one North Star instead of what the patient needs being the compass that you're following. So that's my concern. That being said, I think because people are talking about it more, there are more people who are interested in it and getting into the field. And there's some interesting innovations happening too, like the world of psychedelic assisted healing is an interesting one. That's another place where I worry about it getting co opted and it's about a silver bullet instead of the long, slow work, that kind of thing. But there's also a lot of possibilities there. And more famous people with big platforms are talking about therapy, which is giving more people permission to do it. I think that's powerful. My hope through COA is that at some point there is sort of an EQ component to childhood. You know, we learn in PE class how to throw a ball, but we don't learn how to talk about our feelings or how to get through conflict or what to do when someone dies. Like these things that are kind of expected our parents will teach us, but not everyone's parents are equipped to teach them those things. And so my hope is that it becomes more a part of general education, that people learn how to deal with their emotions. So that's something I'm excited about as well.
All right. What is a common misconception about mental health that you've seen, and what are you doing to help combat these misconceptions?
Yeah, so the most common thing that I see is this idea that it's only for people who have big problems or only people who are quote unquote broken or in crisis. That is the misconception I'm trying to clear up. You know, when you think about physical health many years ago, it was not very preventative. It was all about wait until someone gets sick and then try to fix the problem. And what we realized over time is that that's much more expensive, it's much more difficult, the outcomes are worse, and that if you wait for a problem to become a problem, then it's harder to fix it. And so this kind of physical fitness revolution happened where all of a sudden it became much more common to work out, to watch what you eat, the importance of getting good sleep started to become talked about more. And these days it's, I think, very widely accepted that it's a lot easier to prevent physical health problems than it is to fix them. That doesn't mean everyone is good at prioritizing that, but it's a lot more common now than it used to be. I think about like 20 years ago, if a person said that they were going for a run, people would be like, "What do you mean? Who are you running from? What do you mean?" And now it's very common to say that you're going for a run. So the change I'm trying to make in the world is the equivalent for mental health. 10 years from now, I want people to say, "Oh, I'm going to my emotional fitness class," and have it not even be a remarkable thing. I want it to just be a normal, regular thing that people do. They work out their mental health the way someone would work out their physical health. Because in my experience, many of the mental health problems in the world, anxiety, depression, all of these things, are a result of people not having been given the tools and the space and the permission and the freedom and the support to feel their feelings, to feel through tough things when they happen. And a lot of our struggles now are a result of being raised in environments where we weren't given the tools to feel through tough things as they happen. And so I think as we learn how to do that, as younger kids learn how to manage their feelings better and parents learn how to parent kids through that, I actually think there are going to be less instances of major mental health problems as a result. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
Okay. We have someone asking, what was your dissertation topic, and have you continued exploring it today or integrated it into the work you're currently doing?
Oh, I love this. So my dissertation topic was ADHD and success without the use of medication. So, my dissertation was exploring, are there people who feel like their ADHD was actually a positive factor in their life versus just something that they had to overcome, and why? Because my philosophy of it was that ADHD is just a different way of being in the world, and the problem is just that our society is not set up for people whose minds work that way. But rather than always asking people to change who they are in order to fit into an environment, I wanted to explore what does it look like to change your environment to accommodate the way that your mind works. So, I really wasn't meant to sit still in a classroom for 8 hours a day. That wasn't good for me, but that's what I had to do because that's how schools worked. And I wondered what happens for people who are allowed to do things a little bit differently. So I interviewed a handful of people who are very successful, who don't take meds for their ADHD, and who have found interesting life hacks for dealing with their ADHD and have found a way to actually leverage it as a positive force in their life. And the big finding from the dissertation was that the stigma that people face for learning differently and for being told that they're not smart enough or doing things wrong, those stigmas are actually more harmful to people with ADHD than the symptoms themselves. And that people who are given an encouragement to figure out how to accommodate themselves instead of trying to change themselves, those people had higher instances of success. And I tried to apply this to all kinds of things, that our minds just work differently, and we should be trying to figure out how to set ourselves up for success with the people that we are, in addition to working on ourselves, obviously. So I did a TEDx talk about my dissertation. It was the first big public speaking thing that I ever did. It's hard to watch it back. The first thing you ever do should be embarrassing to you many years later. But definitely I have integrated this into my work in an ongoing way. I certainly work with a lot of leaders who have ADHD. That's been helpful. But also just it launching my public speaking career was a really helpful thing. So that was great. I've since done another TED Talk about why you should try therapy yesterday. That's the one I would recommend watching if you want to see what that's all about. And one of the pieces of advice I got around my doctoral dissertation that was helpful is pick a topic you care about that you don't care about so much that you are going to be hurt if the research comes out in any particular way. Like, you don't want to be so close to it that you're too invested in the outcome of the research. So the ADHD was nice for me because it was a part of my identity, but it wasn't all of who I am. And so it was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
All right. And I think from another attendee, we have, do you have any suggestions or advice for younger undergraduates who are getting experience in psychology besides therapy?
Let's see. Let me think about that. I would say joining associations, going to therapy lectures, conferences, seeing what it's all about, seeing what topics you resonate, seeing which types of psychology resonate with you. Take all the interesting psychology classes that you can, not just the ones that are required for the major. Like, the best class I took was with the professor I told you about, and it was called Psychology of Consciousness. It was not required for my major, but I just thought it was so interesting to think about what is consciousness and, how do we think about it. I felt like my philosophy training helped me a lot in psychology, because in philosophy you get good at wondering, at getting curious about talking about things without having to find answers, and I think that's been really useful for that. Let's see, other things. What else can people do? Yeah, I would just look at what are all of the psychology lectures and conferences and stuff happening around you, and go to them, meet people, network. And then something else I highly recommend doing is start getting good at writing. Writing is it's just like a thread through the whole journey that you're going to have to get good at, and it's a great way of learning more about how you think and getting your thoughts out there, that kind of thing. So think about maybe starting a Medium. Medium's like an online blog thing that you can do. And then read. Do all the reading you can. I'm actually going to see if I can find, I have this stack of books books that have been really profound for me. And the more you read, the more you are going to have a sense of what you care about, what you believe in, what you agree with. Here is a tweet of mine, which is like the stack of books that changed my life. Definitely, I recommend all the books in that pile, but find the psychology books that people recommend and start reading them. That's definitely a good way. And I hope you'll all follow me on Twitter too. Twitter is definitely where I'm the most engaged, and I'd love to connect on there.
All right, and our last question for today. We have a student who's interested in sociology and social psychology research. Her undergraduate thesis is also centered on these subjects, and she's interested in policy making and attending grad school for clinical psychology. Are these goals and interests too dissimilar, and will the likelihood of success be greater by choosing between these fields?
I don't have a perfect answer here because I think there are different schools of thought. There are a lot of people out there who are going to tell you to niche down, meaning like pick a specialty and really invest in it. And there are other people who are going to say, don't limit yourself, figure out what you love and then move toward it. And I think I'm more in the latter category at first and then the former category later. So while you're figuring out exactly what you want to do everything. Definitely study social psychology, study clinical psychology, study policymaking, do everything you can in all of the areas. What you'll probably find is that you're sort of naturally drawn toward certain things. Once you get out into the world of private practice, especially, it does help to have a niche because it can be hard to build up business. And if you become sort of known for a particular thing, it gets easier to get started in that way. So I think having some sense of what your specialty is helpful. But I would say in the meantime, do it all. Like, don't limit yourself, try many things. All of these things are very related, like policy and the actual practice itself are super intertwined. So when I think about my path, I did lots of different things in grad school. Then when I started my private practice, I had a specialty. I specialized in working with people in tech. And that really helped me build sort of a reputation and name for myself. And it didn't mean I only with people in tech. I kind of invested in that being my brand. You sort of do have to have a brand these days. But then once that had been established, then I got to branch out again. I got to get more broad and do lots of different things. So I'd say try it all. You will naturally find your way to the stuff that resonates the most.
All right, well, that looks like it's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much for coming out here, Dr. Anhalt, speaking to us, answering all these questions. I hope everybody had a great experience, learned more about clinical psychology and what it means and what its applications are. Our next panel will be with Shelley Garland. She is a PA and she's going to talk about what that is, why she chose her field. So go ahead and head over to the next Zoom room.
Thank you all so much. Great to meet you.